Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the cottage kitchen at the Elliott Homestead. Today, we need to spend some time in the pantry. I need to get a bean soup going for supper. I need to get some bread going for school lunches. And because we've been cooking so much, I need to spend just a little bit of time consolidating and cleaning out the pantry. Now, some of the stuff in the pantry is homegrown and some of it is from the store. We do keep sort of snacky store foods on hand, and I'm gonna show you those as well. Because our kids go to a homeschool co-op, we gotta have lunches that we can have packed and ready to be out the door 2 days a week, which means that we do opt for some convenience foods and we keep those back here in our little snack basket. So let's spend a little bit of time going through the pantry together today, making some bread, making some soup, and finding a little bit of joy in these tiny pockets of our kitchen. So I do keep beans in my pantry, some up here, some down in the root cellar. These are some white navy beans that I've soaked overnight. I just soak them right in the Dutch oven because it saves me having to wash another bowl. So these have been soaking for about 10 hours. I'm gonna strain the water off and then move over to the oven so we can saute some onion and get these beans cooking. So even though I started making this meal technically 10 hours ago, really all I did was put some dried beans from the pantry into some filtered water. And I'm gonna not put that much more effort in right now. I could, of course, saute up celery and onions, or celery and carrots rather, but I'm not gonna even take the time to do that because I really do just have a fairly small window while the kids are running through some of their lessons out there before I gotta get them to piano. So to get these beans cooking, I'm gonna pull a few spices from my pantry in just a second, but I'm just gonna chop up one onion, saute it in a little bit of olive oil with some salt and pepper, dump those beans in with some fresh water and stock and let them kind of slowly simmer for a couple of hours while I go back to the pantry. One of the problems that I have with keeping my pantry in here clean is that it's just so used all the time that even when it's nice and it's organized, it just doesn't stay like that for very long because inevitably you use things up and you need to refill jars and refill spices. So I'm adding in some chili flakes to my bean, and I'm also going to add in a smoked sea salt because I don't have a ham hock, a smoked ham hock to put in here, but I want a little bit of that smoky flavor. This will be a great way to get it. And then lastly, I just kind of had this little remnant in my pantry of these dried mushrooms. Dried mushrooms have a really wonderful, round, earthy, umami flavor. So I'm gonna chop some of those up really small so that my children don't know they're in there, and those will kind of add a little bit of roundness to our beans. One of my very favorite parts about having a well-stocked pantry, as much effort as it takes to keep it stocked and keep it maintained, is that you can throw together meals much faster because you always have food on hand. And even though that doesn't always mean you can have something very quick, it means at least you have something to work with. So it's worth the effort, especially on days like this. Now this is taking me about 5 minutes of kind of prep and cooking time before we finish school. But that means that after all of the efforts of the day and all the running around with errands that we have to do and the cleaning and the laundry and the math homework, it means that we'll have supper ready. So little bit of prep ahead of time, a lot of result at the end. That's a big old thing of beans. So this is all the stock that I have left in my refrigerator, which isn't a ton. So I'm gonna add a bunch of extra water so these beans don't ever dry out. They have lots of liquid to cook in. I would like to thank Made In for sponsoring today's video. I'm going to be using my enameled cast iron Dutch oven to make our supper together tonight. More often than any other pan in my kitchen, this is what I reach for. The design, the attention to detail. This is why home cooks reach for them, but also why Michelin star restaurants across the country do the same. This new linen-colored Dutch oven is made in northeastern France and enameled by hand. It's a 5.5 core and can easily go from stovetop to oven. Whether you're looking to bake, sear, saute, braise, fry, or in our case, make soup, this is a great and versatile pan for you. They even offer a 45-day trial with free returns and shipping if you don't love it. Made In has been kind enough to offer Elliott Homestead viewers 10% off their purchase by using the link below. Okay, the beans are gonna happily simmer here while we tend to the rest of our pantry needs. Okay, so we're back to homeschool co-op tomorrow, which means those to-go lunches like I talked about. And that means that I need to take a little bit of time before tomorrow morning to make sure that our basket is sort of filled with what it needs to be filled with. Part of that involves making that sandwich bread, but we'll do that in a few minutes. This is our sort of lunch basket that the kids can just yank out and grab stuff from for their lunches. There's also little remnants, it looks like, of Christmas things in here. So I'm just gonna dump this and refill it in a nicer way. You want one? I'm glad I found those. I know that this is very unpretty, but this is kind of the reality of a real kitchen. And it also goes to show you why I need to take the time to kind of straighten this out, because inevitably things get forgotten, things get missed, things get spilt, like the hazelnuts here. And no one can really pull from this. This isn't gonna benefit anybody to kind of dig through the bottom through this gross food. So some of this stuff can be moved to smaller bags. We keep, nuts on hand, just like this. There's some dates here, dried cranberries, some chocolates, some meat sticks, some chips, which I've restocked, so I'm gonna add a few more bags of that, basically trying to just make this so that if somebody comes in here, whether it's me or Stuart or the children, they can just yank it out and have what they need. Not the most fun kitchen task. So some of this food that is in this basket falls into the not best but better category. We try to keep foods around that make it possible for people just to grab stuff, because you're not gonna make bean soup all the time. We just try to do the best we can, stocking it with foods that we feel good about eating. So a little bit of compromise on some of these foods, but ultimately ones that we need to make. Okay, snack basket is all set. We've got some nuts, some chocolates, some chips, some dates, some meat sticks. It's all organized, it's all freshened up. Leftover Christmas candy, I'm stashing away. So some things that come into the pantry, I just move on to different jars because of the way that they fit into the pantry or because they just look nicer to me. This is one of those things. I've since moved my flour from this canister where it lived for years, and I'll show you where that went. But this is now my sugar canister. So I keep maple sugar and sucanate and rapadura on hand. I'm due for some more. But part of cleaning the pantry just means sort of condensing things down and then making yourself a list if there's stuff that needs to be reordered. I've already reordered this. I'm waiting for it to arrive. We'll see what else we find that I'm out of. In order for things to make it to the pantry, they really need to be things that I use often because we have the root cellar underneath our kitchen, which basically serves like a gigantic pantry or storage closet. And so the stuff that's up here needs to earn its keep because the space is limited. And I really want this for convenience. I try to keep my kitchen as functional as possible. So every once in a while, I'm kind of surprised by what I put up here. And it's just kind of a good time to check and make sure that it doesn't just need to go live somewhere else where it's not going to take up this really important space. So let's see what we got up here. So this is a perfect example. This is a green garlic salt. But it's up on a top shelf where I can't reach it. It's not down with my spices. I already have a jar of this out on the counter, so this really shouldn't be up here. This should live down on my bigger spice rack down in the root cellar. Another example would be hazelnuts. So I just stuck a hazelnuts in my basket. I don't need two up here, nor do I want them because nuts go rancid very quickly. So unless it's in the snack basket and it's getting moved through really quickly, I really don't want to keep nuts at room temperature for very long. Here's another perfect example, sliced almonds. These should really be in a vacuum packed thing in smaller portions, some of them kept in the freezer, and then just a small jar kept out here. So let's move back to front. I have powdered sugar, which I do use. It doesn't go bad at room temperature and it can just sort of stay back there when I need it for baking. Then I have some cornmeal here for cornbread. Small jar, again, the rest is in long-term storage, so that's fine here. I've got some preserved lemons and these really beautiful salt-packed capers. Those are both stable at room temperature and they're fine. I don't need them a ton, so they can kind of be tucked back there. So I try to think about how I'll use this food as I arrange it. It doesn't take a ton of time. Here's my polenta, same thing. Let's see, what else? This is a jar of homemade croutons that I keep for salads, so we'll keep that. That cycles through really quickly. Here are some dried currants. I use those for scones and biscuits and things. And then this is my preserved freeze-dried garlic from last year, so I grab from this almost every day. I really, though, should keep a smaller jar down by my stove because that's where I use it. This is why you can never have too many jars. If you're like me, you can probably think that unless you have the time to super detail a piece of your kitchen like this, it's just not worth the effort. That's just not true. Even just 5 or 10 minutes of organizing your space and making it usable, I have found makes it so much more enjoyable. So we've only been over here for a couple of minutes. I've got a few things to take down into the root cellar where they will live happily. I've already cleared up then this much space in my pantry. Every once in a while too, I find a piece of equipment that I have stored somewhere that maybe isn't the great place for it anymore. Such it goes with my pasta machine. I kept this out on my counter for a long time and then I kind of got in the habit of rolling pasta by hand. Then I stuck it down here. Maybe I thought it would be close and convenient, but now I'm gonna move it down because I cleaned my root cellar and I have a whole shelf full of kitchen equipment that I use. So it has a nice, clean, organized place to go, and that will serve us better than having it in here. Now, there's a couple of items that I do buy in bulk that you do need to store correctly. One of those is the nuts, like we already talked about. Another example would be chocolate chips. So now I just have this loose down in here. That's very poor planning on my part because little hands are going to be very tempted to reach in there and grab some out. Plus, mice are an issue, so we try to keep the food as protected as we can. And pantry moths are an issue. So what they'll do is they'll get into these and they'll eat them and lay their larvae. And I know that sounds really disgusting, and it is. So we try to prevent it. One way we do that is to keep things in these sealed jars. I have found that these work the best. You don't want to keep bags like this in the refrigerator because they'll mold eventually, depending on how fast you go through them. So the best solution that I have found is to keep some out here in jars and then keep the rest in the root cellar, vacuumed sealed. I'll show you what my setup looks like that real quick. But first, let's keep some chocolate chips out here. Okay, so here's an example of sort of condensing things down. We get these electrolytes, and I keep a glass jar open where people can just reach in and grab one as they want. But when that jar's full, I can't stock it full of the new boxes. And so just taking a few seconds to make sure everything's as condensed as possible saves a lot of space. Okay, down in this very bottom shelf, which was obviously part of the original closet before they built this whole counter space, this is where I keep vinegars and oils that I use a lot of. So for example, I keep a large jug of apple cider vinegar, of rice vinegar. Usually I have a gallon of olive oil down here, as well as some of my specialty bottles, and then just a variety of vinegars, which some have leaked up here. So I'm gonna take a second, vacuum that out, because that's inevitably where all the crumbs go. And then just make sure all the oils and vinegars are together because they're so often used together. It makes sense to store them next to each other. Okay, we're almost there. In the spirit of keeping like with like, I've got some loose teas here that have filtered into the pantry. So those are gonna go downstairs onto my tea shelf where everything is condensed. I'm going to just do a quick wipe. If you don't have time for this, it's not a big deal. Quick wipe of my bottles because when I cook, I tend to get very excited and sometimes just grab the bottle with whatever stage of hands I have. So they tend to get a little sticky and a little dirty. And I find like it's really the small things that keep me going in the kitchen. It's having the spices organized or having the jars full so I have what I need. It's having clean bottles or a full salt basket. Just these small little things that make a big difference in how the kitchen feels overall. So this might seem a tiny bit fussy, but to me, it really helps to bring joy into the kitchen. Okay, that shelf is good. The snack shelf is good. Our pantry staples are all set. My extra dishes are all accounted for, so we only have one shelf left, which is actually not that bad a shape, considering. This is probably the hardest shelf, and that's just because there's a lot of moving pieces that get used a lot. Most of my spices, I try to keep in jars just because it makes them easier to stack. I know what they are, but I've put labels on the bottom so that my family knows what they are if they want to use them. I kind of have a simple rule, which is bigger jars in the back, smaller jars in the front. I keep the smaller jars on a tray so I can just lift it out easily if I need to. It kind of helps to keep everything condensed a little bit. So these get a quick wipe down because they do get dusty. And then they're all going to go back so long as they're in good shape. They're topped off, they're condensed as they need to be. A lot of times, if you cook from scratch, you end up with a lot of white powders, like cornstarch or baking soda or pectin or yeasts or gelatin. So these are ones that are really important to make sure are labeled. And inevitably, when you wash the jars to reuse them, the label gets, lost. So those are always good ones. I always think, oh, I'll know. I'll remember what cornstarch is as opposed to arrowroot. I don't. Okay, here we go. So I try to remember when I'm stacking the jars to put the least used ones on the bottom row and the most used ones on the top row. So this is an ancho chili powder, which I love, but I don't use it as much as I use active dry yeast. Same with fennel and nutmeg. This is another chili powder with a kimchi salt. So the ones that I grab the most are on the top. Small little tricks, but that really make for a highly functional kitchen. Okay. Now, if there are ones that I, fairly rarely use, such as tarragon salt, I love having it here. It's a great product, but I don't reach for it as much as I reach for these other things. So that gets moved to the back row. Now, this spice shelf is also sort of my baking shelf. So I keep my sugar here, and I also keep things like sorghum and vanilla. So those kind of get grouped together because they're often used together. Cinnamon would be another example. And here are these really beautiful maraschino cherries I got for Christmas. So we'll tuck those back in there as well because they're pretty to look at. Let's see, do it like that. Okay. I think we're all accounted for here. We've got our great baking supplies and our cookbooks. The spices are all organized. The snack box is ready for kids. Everything's cleaned out and organized, at least for the moment. So I'm going to clean up the wreckage a little bit. We're going to mix up some bread for lunch tomorrow, check our beans, and then carry on with our day.